Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph. As always, I'm happy to be back with you guys this week. Let's go ahead and jump into our true crime case for today. Grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, but most certainly grab your wine if it's the evening. Either way, let's get into it. Our true crime story takes place in Mississippi starting off, but we will land in Denver, Colorado towards the end of the case. And actually, we'll go a couple of places in between. So this case is a little all over the place. Malika Griffin was born in 1971. She was the only daughter of her parents. And very early on, they recognized that she had academic capabilities that were far beyond where she was in school at in elementary. She could perform well and she outdid most of her peers. And she was just a brainiac, if you will, very brilliant. And her mom commented that she was always the type of person who loved to support others. After doing so well throughout middle school, elementary, and then high school, she graduated in 1989 and decided that she was going to Jackson State University to pursue a degree in chemistry because she loved science. And of course, she continued to excel there academically. Unlike most people, Malika was pretty much to herself. She didn't go out and party a lot. She would often just focus on her academics and getting her degree. She was very dedicated to knowing what she wanted, and she was not going to allow anybody to take her off her track. She graduated in 1993 and she eventually made the decision to travel alone. And honestly, I think that's such a good deal to do after completing your degree. And if you don't have a whole lot of debt, well, you can travel and just kind of run amok. You know how people take a gap year? Well, this was very similar to what she did. She actually spent a couple of years just backpacking all throughout Europe, enjoying her travels. But when she had to come back to reality of the States, she quickly realized that she was in way over her head. And maybe she shouldn't have done it for so long because in 1999, she soon filed for bankruptcy. But she got back on her feet, and that's okay because, things happen. And she eventually gained employment at a pharmacy in Denver, Colorado, and then rented an apartment. On April 20th, she was disturbed by the noise of a neighbor's dog. And she quickly went to the fence of the neighbor and told the neighbor, who was a woman, her name was Deborah Lozelle, that if her dogs ever got into her backyard, that she would kill her neighbor's dog. And Malika was furious. She was screaming. And Deborah, who was her neighbor, the dogs didn't belong to her. They actually belonged to her fiance. She was kind of bewildered, a little perplexed that she was going in so hard that she just decided to tell her fiance, whose name was Jason Horsley, about the event. Jason was a carpenter. He had moved to Denver, Colorado in 1997, him and Deborah, to really get away from the environment that they were in. They rented an apartment in this very diverse neighborhood, hoping to meet others and acclimate into a new environment. When Deborah informed Jason of this argument that, or really not even an argument, this altercation that ensued right outside of their home, she did her best to try to smooth it over with Malika because she didn't really want any problems. The question that I'm posing for you guys is, it is not uncommon to get into it with your neighbors, right? I would say it can happen. And so when something like that ensues, let's say your neighbor's dog is keeping you up or whatever the case may be. Maybe you're in an apartment and they're stumping on the ceiling. How would you guys handle that? Just an open ended question. And I want you guys to respond to me in the comments because you guys have been doing a fantastic job of leaving your comments and your thoughts. I just want to know, what would be your go to? Would it be to go and talk to your landlord? Would it be to talk to your neighbors and try to have a civil conversation? Well, Deborah went back to Malika and was like, hey, like, I apologize for my dogs being too noisy. Kind of explain the situation. These are my fiance's dogs, and we just recently moved in, and really tried to do her best of smoothing the situation out. But Malika didn't want to hear anything about it. She did not engage. And this continued to be ongoing, and it continued to be ongoing tension between both neighbors. So they continued to have run ins with Malika over their dogs. And for 4 weeks, there were just arguments back and forth, back and forth. But on May 18th of 1999, it was a little after 8 p.m. and Jason came home from work. And one of his routines is he would simply get out of his truck, because as I mentioned before, he was a carpenter, and he would just unload his tools. Routine, right? But this particular night, Malika came out screaming at the top of her lungs, saying that Jason was unloading his tools on her lawn. So when Deborah heard the commotion outside, she was boiled over at this point, and she decided that she would come outside this time, and she wasn't going to allow Malika to argue with her fiance, because they've been having these arguments in and out for weeks, and she was tired. She was fed up. And according to witnesses and people who knew about the situation, Deborah came out and was saying everything that she had accomplished for the most part. Like, I make $40,000 a year. I got a man. Like, you're just jealous because I got a man and you're probably a lesbian. Like, just hurling insults at her. And Malika, of course, retorted. And she was just like, you need to get out of my face. And she threatened her. And one of the threats that she made that seemed to be pertinent to this particular case is she said, I don't do prisons and I'm not afraid to die. Which in street terms mean it's whatever. It's up. You know what I mean? Like, we can fight, we can get down, you can catch all this smoke. Malika then tells Deborah to wait there, that she's going to go inside of her house. And Deborah kind of feels like, okay, we had words, we exchanged our words, and she turns and she leaves and goes into her and Jason's apartment. But Jason continues to unload his tools, thinking, hey, this is just another Tuesday, because we argue all the time with this woman. And a couple of minutes later, Deborah hears a gunshot, and she comes out of her apartment looking to see what has took place, and other neighbors start to pour out of their homes as well. And that's when she found Jason in his vehicle, slumps over. He had been shot in his back. Now, immediately, of course, she calls 911, and CPR is unable, and EMT is unable to help him, because the gunshot wound he received entered his back, it penetrated his heart, and it exited his chest. So it was a fatal shot. He was immediately killed. And according to police officers, when they canvassed the area to talk to witnesses, nobody saw the altercation take place. But what they did see was Malika flee the scene on foot. She had a backpack with her and she left. They soon discovered through trial and error that Malika went to a friend's home. She asked her friend Monique if she could borrow her car because her and her boyfriend just got into it. And Monique said, no, you actually can't borrow my car. And the keys were sitting on the kitchen table. And Malika decides just to take the keys and holds up a 9mm gun and threatens Monique that if she doesn't allow her to leave this house with her car, that she would kill her. So of course, Monique has no dog in the fight. She's like, just take it. Once police find out that Malika has taken this car, they put a bolo out on the car, and they then search her apartment. And it's inside of her apartment that they found more than what they bargained for, because initially they thought this was obviously a feud between two neighbors and maybe it got out of control? Was this self-defense? They had no idea what happened. And they were just trying to unravel the pieces of the puzzle. When they entered her apartment, they found that she had two hand grenades, an assault rifle with hollow point. She had an anarchist cookbook. She also had a book that was called The Poor Man's James Bond. And these books really specialized in how to change your identity if you needed to, how to make bombs, how to use weapons. And when they delved into this case, they realized that maybe this was premeditated. Maybe this was not just a situation that had got out of control. Maybe this was something that she devised over the course of weeks. They also found two binders, and when they opened these two binders, they saw that it served as Malika's diary. And it revealed that she had an intense hate for white people, that she wanted them dead. And she pretty much thought that a race war had to happen against whites in order for racism to be eradicated. And she had a manifesto, if you will, detailing her hate for whites and the war that she had against whites. Now, it's pertinent to know that Deborah Lozelle and Jason Horsley were white individuals. And so this only made her hostility make more sense in the context of what had been found. She had been on the run for 2 days, and finally they locate her car in Iowa City, Iowa. We talked about in the second half of season 8 in our first case that there are certain times that FBI comes into a state case. And because the case took place in Denver, but they found the car in Iowa, this now they now had to enact the help of the FBI. For 8 months, they could not locate Malika. They had no idea where she was. So the FBI went to America's Most Wanted and aired the episode about Jason's death, everything that took place, all the details, and also aired that she was missing. Now, they got several tips from this American Most Wanted episode. However, all of the tips kind of led to dead ends. There was no tips that manifested that led them to Malika Griffin. So she had effectively kind of disappeared. And those 8 months quickly turned into 6 years, and there was still no sign of Malika. So they really felt like she left the country. And when I say that no leads resolved into anything, even if it was something simple or they thought it was nothing much to it, they had to fully vet all the tips. And they just didn't have anything. And they knew from her past that she went backpacking in Europe, which meant she had a passport. And it was possible that she just left the country. We also have to keep in mind that she had those books that help you to change your identity and how to get fake things. And we're not dealing with a person who's an idiot. As I've already said, she was very intelligent and educated, and she wanted to find out something she could and use it to her advantage. And so they felt like she just wasn't even in the country. But in June of 2005, the episode of Jason Horsley's death re-aired on America's Most Wanted. And by this time, they had aired this episode 9 times, hoping to track down any leads. And this is when they received a call from someone who said that they felt like that there was an employee that worked at their biotech firm in San Diego. And at first, they didn't really know if this would lead anywhere because it's been 6 years, guys. So they were not even sure if this would track, but they did their due diligence and they tracked it down and they found out that it was indeed Malika. And Malika wasn't doing too many fancy tricks to try to change her name because she used the name or the new fake name of Lake. And Malika Lake, you can see how that correlates. She wasn't trying to be too crafty with that one. The next day, once they identified that it was indeed Malika, FBI agents, along with state police, raided her home and they didn't know what to expect because the last time they were in Malika's apartment. They found these diaries full of violence. They also found 2 hand grenades. They found a rifle, hollow point bullets. They didn't know if this was going to be a violent interaction. She did surrender to police once they knocked on the door. They did not have to use any type of force, but she did invoke her rights to not speak, and she quickly got an attorney. Now, the FBI continued their investigation and they knew they would have to extradite her back to Denver, Colorado, where this took place. But they were able to figure out how she was able to acquire a false ID and how she was able to just maintain a low profile. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that she took jobs where she could take money under the table, or she would get housing where she wouldn't have to put in, too much effort, get too much background information on herself. She also had a false ID. And so she really was able to use those books that she had studied for what seemed to be quite some time to her advantage to just fly right underneath their radar. And by July of 2005, she was extradited to Colorado and was charged with first-degree murder. Her trial began in February of 2006. Now, the prosecution was able to give a lot of evidence. They gave all the forgeries that she had made, how she got the false ID, how she was able to fly under the radar for so long. And so they really had a lot of evidence on their side in terms of this case. But for Malika and her defense, they said that she shot Jason in self defense. However, the state was able to combat this very quickly because they had medical records that substantiated that Jason was shot at point blank range, meaning his back was turned to her. She walked up to him and put the gun against his back and shot him, and he was turned away. So they even suggested that this might have been a premeditated murder. As I told you before, they had those diaries and they produced that as evidence. And according to the prosecutor, he said when they brought in the diaries, she noticeably changed. She became very shifty in her seat, very stiff and cold, because she knew that that was going to tell a different story. Now, jurors heard about all of her violent tendencies and her thoughts, and the defense, they tried to combat that by bringing her on the stand. And on the stand, she was very confident. She came across very calm and educated as she was. She used all of these things in her nature that were complementary when she was young and going through school. She now used that as a tactic to try to manipulate the jury into thinking another story or her version of the story. She claimed that she did write it, but it was not, in fact, a diary entry, but she was writing a play about a Black female and the Black female experience in America, and she was going to release the play. But this was not how she truly felt about white people. This was only art. She also claimed that she had no knowledge of guns at all, and this was simply self defense. She was simply defending herself. Now, we all know that while that is interesting, the prosecution has an opportunity to cross examine. And when they cross examined her, whatever hope she had of getting away with it was thwarted quickly because they were able to disprove that she did have knowledge of guns. She had books dedicated to weaponry and how to use it. They also were able to say, you love theater, you were going to release a play. When's the last time you went to the theater? And she couldn't give them not one time that she had been to the theater. And that put doubt in the jury's mind. Like, was this really a play, or was this really just hate that you had for another race? The jury deliberated for about 8 hours, and when they came back, they found her guilty of first-degree murder, which in Denver, Colorado, that is an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole. She also was found guilty of that aggravated robbery and motor theft that she did. In April 2009, the Colorado Court of Appeals heard her argument. She argued that her conviction should be overturned because her trial attorney was not licensed to practice law in Colorado at the time of her trial. Her notebook entries should not have been admitted into evidence, and self-defense instructions to the jury were not given properly. And the prosecutor had used impermissible arguments in his closing statement. All of her claims were denied, and her conviction was upheld on April 16th of 2009. That is the case of Malika Griffin. Now, I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say about this case because although this case is pretty short, I do think this case is interesting because I have had to wonder a couple of things. One, how should we handle contentious relationships with neighbors? Because they have a whole show dedicated on ID called Fear Thy Neighbor. And all of those true crime stories are exclusively dedicated to people who end up getting into a contentious relationship with their neighbors and then someone ends up dying. We naturally think, oh, we'll just pick up and move. You should just be able to go somewhere else. Picking up your life and moving because of a contentious neighbor, while it seems like the obvious solution, it cannot always be done. I'm anxious to hear what you guys think about that because as I said right when we began the case, this seems to be something that happens often. So what's the answer here? My other question would be, did Malika have a mental break? It seemed like she departed from reality at some point during this case. I don't know if it began when she went backpacking to Europe, if it started in Denver and just kind of got out of control and explosive and nobody really saw the signs because it seemed like Malika was very quiet and to herself for the most part. She didn't have a lot of friends. It just seemed odd. And of course, that never really came up, but the type of person I am, I'm always reflecting, thinking deeper. And I wonder, did she have a mental break? But she did everything to evade the situation. She ran. But it seemed like she had planned it too. Albeit, I don't know. These are only things that we're surmising at the end of the day. But this case, while short, was very interesting to me. So let me know your thoughts. Let's continue to talk together and try to come up with why she did it at all. And sadly, it ended in the loss of life for no reason, just out of pure hate. That's our case for this week. Until next time, this is Murder in the Black.